Under the hammer. The Cadillac ragtop slid to the curb on the darkened street, parking under a dead streetlight. Its engine panted in the darkness, and exhaust fumes wafted into the night like cigar smoke. Johnny shut off the car and listened in the neighborhood. Wind blew through the trees lining the sidewalk, making the leaves gossip to each other. A radio was playing an oldies song Johnny recognized, but he couldn't place. A dog barked somewhere, but went silent after he'd made his case. Johnny let his eyes roam back and forth, watching the neighborhood through the windshield. Most of the windows in the neighborhood were dark, and those few that had lights on kept the blinds and curtains pulled. The patterns thrown by late-night television programming splashed erratic shadows against those walls, making the houses look possessed. Johnny knew the feeling. From over his right shoulder, Johnny heard the sound of a spinning cylinder. He didn't turn to look. He knew the back seat of the Caddy was just as empty now as it had been when he drove out of Philly a few days ago. The sound was only in his mind, which was where the six-gun saint called home these days. "Look, we can't just go in guns blazing," Johnny said to his passenger. "We want to take Tony out, we're going to need the lay of the land, especially if half of what you told me about what he is now is true. We're going to need help." The saint's only response was the sharp click of a hammer drawing back, and a flash of violent impatience. When Johnny opened the driver's side door and got out, though, the Geist didn't try to tug on his strings. The two of them crossed the road and took the 4 steps up to the concrete porch around number 876 Fountain Drive. Johnny rapped on the door, 3 short and 1 long, and snapped the safety strap off of his shoulder holster. Quiet footsteps came from inside, and 3 separate deadbolts turned. The door opened, and a man stood there in the darkness with one hand behind the door, staring out at Johnny. He was an older guy, with 2 long, graying hair that hung about his face in a messy curtain. Long and lean, his skin was just starting to fall away from his muscles, his old tattoos coming apart around the edges. Just above his nose, though, was a mess of burn scars, and a pair of wide eyes that glistened wetly in the shadows. His thin lips drew back from yellow, nicotine-stained teeth, and he favored Johnny with a smile. It was just as sharp, and just as mean as it had ever been.
"Johnny Hammer,"
Alonzo de la Morte said in a slightly wheezy voice.
"I heard you were dead."
"Not for lack of trying," Johnny said. Alonzo turned his head slightly, looking at the empty space over Johnny's shoulder with his blind eyes. Johnny heard the saint laugh, his caustic, bloody chuckle.
"That would explain why you've got that thing riding shotgun on you,"
Alonzo said. "You heard about what happened down in Philly?" Johnny asked.
"Bad news travels faster than that big bore engine I heard you pull up in,"
Alonzo said.
"And I'm guessing you took back roads all the way here. But yeah, I heard."
"And you can guess why I'm here now."
"Sure,"
Alonzo said, shrugging one shoulder.
"But guesses ain't worth a pot of piss in the wind. So before I decide what I'm gonna do, how about you just tell me why you're on my doorstep just this side of midnight?"
"When I saw the way Tony was going to run his business after the old man died, I got out," Johnny said. "I didn't do him any harm on my way out, either. I didn't send a package to the DA or squeal on anybody. I just didn't want to be a part of what he was doing. Would have been fine just leaving it like that, but he pushed it."
"Get to the point,"
Alonzo said. "I'm here to settle this," Johnny said. "Blood for blood. I want him dead."
"That's a tall order, kid."
Alonzo frowned at the air where the saint stood.
"Maybe 5 years back you could have done it. Now, even with your new friend, you're seriously outgunned."
"I know," Johnny said, "and that's why I'm looking for help." Alonzo snorted.
"Even if I said yes, what the hell am I gonna do?"
Johnny leaned forward. Even though Alonzo had been blind for years, he flinched, as if he could feel the sheer, penetrating force of Johnny's eyes on him. "This city is full of ghost stories," Johnny said. "You know which ones are real and which ones aren't. Tony wants to build himself an army of stolen souls? Then I think I'm gonna fight fire with fire." Alonzo ran his tongue over his teeth, clearly considering Johnny's words. Johnny stood there, still as death. Even the saint seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the old shooter to make his decision. Finally, Alonzo let out a long breath, and Johnny heard him ease down on the hammer on the sawed-off shotgun he was holding behind the door. Alonzo reached over and flicked a light switch, stepping back a bit.
"Come on in, kid, before somebody sees you,"
he said. Johnny crossed the threshold, carefully snapping the strap back over his holster. He saw the corner of Alonzo's mouth twitch as the former hitman slid his weapon back into a concealed slot in a side table.
"You had coffee?"
Alonzo asked. "Not since I hit the state line," Johnny said.
"All right, I'll brew a pot."
Alonzo headed off toward the kitchen, seeing with his hands as he found his way through the home he'd lived in ever since he lost his eyes and gained his second sight.
"I got a feeling this is gonna take a while."